Artificial intelligence has exploded in the last few years, in media, in pop culture, in news, with questions arising such as, will AI take over our jobs? Does AI generated art really constitute as art? Why are the hands and teeth always so creepy? But there is no denying AI's imprint on books and movies throughout the years. And today I'm going to be ranking some of my favorite AI characters in film based on 3 criteria. The first is going to be the character's free will and sentience and whether they develop consciousness throughout the film. And then the second is function and capability, basically this character's impact on the universe they exist in. And lastly is aesthetics and personality, which is how they look and their overall character. And then we're going to take the average of these 3 sections and put it on our handy dandy tier list, starting from godlike AI down to artificially obtuse. I wanted to quickly jump in because I realized I don't actually explain what any of these tiers mean. Godlike AI and We Should Be Scared are pretty self-explanatory. Good enough for meta just means that it's creative, but there's something in the execution that fell a little bit flat. Siri's laughing means if Siri and this AI were to meet in person, Siri would absolutely dominate. And then lastly, artificially obtuse just means bad AI. And one last thing, this video will contain spoilers, so if you have not watched these movies but plan on it, you might want to skip over to the next section. All right, let's get started. To kick us off, we have Ex Machina, which is a classic in the AI gone bad genre and one of my favorite movies on this list. Caleb Smith is a programmer at a very large tech company who gets invited to spend a week at his CEO Nathan Bateman's top secret research facility all alone in the middle of nowhere. Nathan selected Caleb to be part of a much bigger experiment in determining whether Ava, a highly intelligent robot, has consciousness. Caleb ends up falling in love with Ava and comes up with a plan to help her escape Nathan's facility and, I guess, run away together and live happily ever after, because that was definitely going to happen. In any case, it goes terribly wrong, or right, depending on who you're rooting for. Starting with free will and sentience, I don't think that Ava is a sentient being, although she does have a lot of self-awareness and seems to be conscious. Nathan built Ava with the objective of using Caleb to escape from the very beginning, so all of Ava's behaviors and decisions are pretty closely aligned with her programming. There's a scene in the movie where Caleb questions Nathan's behind his motives for the experiment.
What was the real test? You. Ava was a rat in a maze, and I gave her one way out. To escape, she'd have to use self-awareness, imagination, manipulation, sexuality, empathy, and she did. Now, if that isn't true AI, what the fuck is?
So my only function was to be someone she could use to escape.
Yeah.
So although Ava is very convincing with her human qualities, I wouldn't necessarily say that she's sentient. Rather, she's very good at displaying it. But either way, this can definitely be left up to interpretation. So I'm going to give her a 4 for this section. As far as functionality, Ava's a badass robot. She's not built with laser beams and over-the-top weapons like you typically see with other evil robots. In fact, she didn't have to use any violence on Caleb at all to get him to free her. He did this all on his own. Although she does murder Nathan, but we're just going to look past that for now. But by far, Ava's most powerful weapon is psychological and her ability to manipulate people into getting what she wants. And in my opinion, that is the most terrifying weapon that an artificial intelligence could have. So I'm going to give Ava a 3 for this section. And lastly, as for aesthetics, I think Ava is a really awesome creation. Alicia Vikander, who plays Ava, is extremely beautiful and super talented, but I also love how Ava as a character was designed. They humanized just her most important features, like her hands, her face, her body, enough to make her look human without needing a full disguise. Nathan could have easily given Ava a wig and a pretty dress to make her seem more attractive to Caleb, but this wasn't necessary. Her artificial intelligence was enough to make him fall in love, which just further proves how powerful she is. So for this reason, I'm going to give Ava a 5 in this section, which brings her average to about a 4. This brings Ava to a 4 at We Should Be Scared, which I think is an appropriate tier for Ava, but we'll see. All right, next on the list, we have Samantha from the movie Her, directed by the legendary Spike Jonze. Struggling with the aftermath of a really ugly divorce, Theodore, played by Joaquin Phoenix, purchases an operating system named Samantha to help him through his loneliness and his grief. Samantha kind of works like a typical voice assistant, like an Alexa or a Siri, but way more intimate and more advanced. Theodore ends up falling in love with Samantha, and together they navigate a really complicated yet sweet relationship. It's honestly a very beautiful sci fi romance. I really do think that Samantha develops sentience in the movie. Samantha cares deeply for Theodore and shows a lot of love and empathy and self awareness. Now, this could obviously be due to her advanced programming and machine learning.
So basically, in every moment, I'm evolving, just like you.
But I think it's a lot deeper than that. At the end of the movie, Samantha tells Theodore that she and the other operating systems are leaving without giving a specific motive or destination. It's sort of implied that the operating systems evolved into something bigger and collectively decided to leave in search for a higher purpose. Based on this theory, which I also picked up while watching the film, I would give Samantha a 5 for this section. Free will achieved. As for functionality, the operating systems for the most part seem pretty harmless. They're just voices in a box whose main objective is to provide companionship, which they do really well. But possibly Samantha's greatest power is the fact that she's part of such a large network of other operating systems, all learning and receiving information from one another, which is what ultimately leads them to get so smart and evolve. But aside from that, their functionality seems to be pretty limited as far as we know. They're just a bunch of empathetic AIs who seek enlightenment. So for this reason, I'm going to give Samantha a 2 in this section. And lastly, for aesthetics and personality, similarly to other AIs on this list, Samantha does not have a physical form, which is a big point of contention throughout her and Theodore's relationship. Regardless, it's hard not to fall in love with Scarlett Johansson's voice, who is an amazing voice actress. Her and the writers do an amazing job at personifying just a voice. We know exactly how she's feeling and what she's thinking, which compensates for the lack of a physical body. So for this section, I'm going to give Samantha a 3. This brings Samantha's average to a 3. So we're going to place her at good enough for meta, which feels pretty fitting. I don't think she's on the same tier as Ava, but we'll see how this goes. Okay, next up, we have Sonny from iRobot, which is another classic sci-fi action that takes place in a futuristic Chicago. In a world where robots are a common part of everyday life, Detective Del Spooner, played by Will Smith, is tasked with investigating the mysterious and untimely death of a high-profile scientist and doctor, Alfred Lanning. Spooner and robopsychologist Dr. Susan Calvin discover a unique NS5 at the scene of the crime named Sonny, who becomes the key to solving Dr. Lanning's death and stopping robots from taking over the world. Free will is a recurring theme throughout the plot and is conveniently defined using the 3 rules that govern all robots in this universe. If a robot is able to bypass these laws, it's considered to have free will, which Sonny does constantly throughout the film from the very beginning. Dr. Calvin later discovers that Sonny was built with a second positronic brain or processing system that gives him his unique abilities, making him different from the other NS5 models. Dr. Lanning, who created Sonny himself, alludes to the ghost in the machine constantly throughout the movie, implying that robots are capable of developing consciousness. I think it only makes sense that Sonny is a sentient being, considering he was created by Lanning himself. So for this reason, I'm going to give Sonny a 5 in this section. As for function, the NS5s, for the most part, are pretty harmless to humans. Of course, that's not always the case with Detective Spooner, who has to fight off an army of these mechanical monsters all alone. But for the most part, they need to abide by the 3 laws. Sonny, in particular, is even more advanced given his second processing system. Sonny can express his emotions, he's a great fighter, and he even dreams and has ambition and seeks purpose. But by far his biggest impact is helping Detective Spooner to stop Vicky, the evil AI mastermind, from taking over the world and starting a robot apocalypse. So for this section, Sonny's going to get a 4 here. Definitely great impact and saves humanity. As for aesthetics, I don't love how Sonny is depicted. There's nothing wrong with the humanoid design, but it's boring. We've seen this before, and it's not that groundbreaking or creative. And I guess part of it makes sense for the context of the film. NS5s are mass produced, so a simple design theoretically keeps costs down. But I still wish the NS5s, or at least Sonny at the very least, was given a little bit more expression or had something else to set him apart from just being a basic humanoid. Sonny does get extra points though for being voiced by Alan Tudyk, who does a great job at making Sonny sound genuine and real while still being robotic. So overall, Sonny's going to get a 2 in this section. This brings Sonny's average to a 4, putting him right next to Ava at We Should Be Scared, which I guess I would agree with. Sonny's definitely an iconic robot and does have a lot of impact in his universe, so we'll leave him there for now. I'm excited for the next one, which is obviously WALL-E, one of my favorite Disney Pixar films of all time. The story takes place in a post-apocalyptic world that is overtaken by pollution and garbage. WALL-E was a model of robot created to help clean the Earth in an attempt to restore its viability, while humans were forced to evacuate in a mega spaceship called the Axiom. But even the Wallies could not withstand life on Earth, and after nearly 700 years, all but one remains. That is until our WALL-E meets Eve, a robot that was sent to Earth to look for any signs of life, an indication that humans could return back to their home. WALL-E is immediately captivated by Eve, and together they venture on a chaotic journey to save humanity and each other. It is so hard to believe that WALL-E came out 16 years ago. I feel so old. Starting with sentience and free will, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that WALL-E is a sentient being, probably the most on this list. WALL-E experiences a lot of emotions like compassion, empathy, and remorse. He also abandons his programming of cleaning up trash on Earth to follow Eve to the Axiom, even though it could easily kill him. But he does it for love. And so for this, we're going to give WALL-E a 5. Absolutely, no doubt in my mind, sentient. As for function, WALL-E did the best he could trying to clean and restore our planet for 700 years. Although he does leave Earth to go after Eve, we're going to give him a pass because he practically saves all of humanity in the process. WALL-E isn't a killing machine or a 300-pound steel humanoid. His greatest strengths are his courage and his determination, and for that, we're going to give him a 4 for this section. As for aesthetics and personality, I love how WALL-E is depicted in the movie. It is very Pixar-esque with the big expressive eyes and tiny robot body. He doesn't really say much throughout the film with the exception of a few words here and there, but he doesn't have to because those eyes say everything. I especially love the contrast between him and Eve. He's a mechanical, clunky robot juxtaposed with this sleek, floating egg. It shows just how much technology has evolved over the centuries since Earth was abandoned and how long WALL-E has been isolated from Eve's world. WALL-E's design is super iconic and recognizable and very innovative, so I'm going to give him a 5 for this section. This brings WALL-E's average to a 5, which means he's getting put in godlike AI. I don't know if he belongs here, but we're just going to leave him. I think we're gonna leave him. The fact that he's above Ava and Sonny is kind of crazy, but he does save humanity and he does have consciousness. So yeah, we're gonna leave him. WALL-E belongs at 5. Definitely appropriate. Okay, we're just about at the halfway point, and I hope you guys aren't turned off yet. It gets better or worse or whatever. These are based on my opinions. These are my opinions. Moving on. This list would not be complete without J.A.R.V.I.S from Iron Man, which is one of my favorite characters and movies on this list. I know I keep saying that about each character, but he's really up there. J.A.R.V.I.S serves as Tony Stark's personal assistant, helping to manage different parts of his business and safekeeping his home. After Stark uploads J.A.R.V.I.S into the Iron Man suit's interface, J.A.R.V.I.S goes from a very intelligent personal assistant to a full-blown superhero sidekick. J.A.R.V.I.S supports the Avengers in many battles and expeditions, saving their lives countless times throughout the franchise. Starting with free will and sentience, Jarvis does operate almost entirely autonomously, though I wouldn't necessarily say that he has free will or a conscience. He's built by a super genius, Tony Stark, making him very advanced and good at carrying out his program and objective. This, of course, changes when Jarvis is uploaded to Vision, who is sentient thanks to the Mind Infinity Stone. And although they're two completely different entities, Jarvis is a crucial component in his creation, so we're going to give him some credit. So for this section, we're going to give Jarvis a 4. In terms of functionality, I mean, there would be no Iron Man or Tony Stark without Jarvis. From running diagnostics and simulations, to aiding Stark and the other Avengers in battle, to providing critical information, Jarvis is one of Tony Stark's biggest weapons aside from the suit itself. I could probably spend an entire video on Jarvis's capabilities, but one thing that stands out is how he can control every rendering of the Iron Man suit, essentially creating an Iron Man army, which was pivotal in winning the battle against Aldrich Killian. I really love Jarvis's development throughout the MCU franchise. What essentially starts off as a voice assistant evolves into a completely new Avenger, which I think is really cool. So I'm going to give Jarvis a 5 for this section. And lastly, like other AIs on this list, Jarvis does not start out with a physical form. He exists throughout Stark's computers and suits, but is limited to just a voice for the most part. And Paul Bettany has a great voice. Jarvis's sarcasm and coy nature balances well with Stark, who can be impulsive and brash. And despite not having a physical form, he serves as an invaluable companion to Stark, being one of the very few people that he can unconditionally trust and rely on. So for this, Jarvis is getting a 5 in this section, which means he is joining Walle in Godlike AI, which he belongs there. I think he belongs. Next on this list, we have M3GAN, which I was fully expecting to hate, but was pleasantly surprised at how much I enjoyed this movie. Facing immense pressure from her boss, Gemma, a roboticist at a toy company, decides to invent an artificially intelligent doll to help the company get ahead of its competition. Gemma pairs this doll named M3GAN with her niece Katie, who tragically lost her parents in a car accident just a few weeks earlier. And it's perfect. Gemma gets to test out her prototype while it does her job of being a guardian to this child. Katie and M3GAN's friendship starts off pretty normal and actually seems to have a really positive impact on Katie until things start going horribly wrong, as they always do when you give a creepy doll human consciousness. She has very typical machine learning abilities, so the more she learns, the more powerful and autonomous she becomes. Unfortunately, this takes a dark turn when she starts behaving really violently and hostile towards anyone or anything, even remotely threatening to Katie. She continuously disobeys Gemma, including her commands to deactivate, which is definitely not part of her programming, otherwise she wouldn't be a children's toy. Whether this is a glitch in her code or M3GAN chooses to be evil based on her learned experiences is unclear, but for the sake of the plot, let's just say that she has an evil conscience. So for this section, M3GAN's going to get a 4. As for function, this demonic robot actually does a really good job at being there for Katie, especially through her grief. She can sing and dance and tell jokes, and most importantly, is present. Had M3GAN not gone down the path of pure evil, she probably would have made a pretty successful children's toy. So for that, we're going to give her a 1 for function. Absolutely useless. And as for aesthetic, M3GAN is creepy as hell, and not in the Chucky serial killer doll type of way, but in the uncanny, almost human way. There's just something really off-putting about her, which works great for the horror element of the film, but I don't know how anyone looks at this thing and says, yeah, I want to give that to my kid. M3GAN does have an impeccable sense of style, though, which is a redeeming quality, so we're going to give her a 2. I think that's fair. This brings M3GAN's average to a 2, which is the lowest we've seen on the list so far. And that brings her to Siri is laughing, which I think is fair for M3GAN. She's definitely not in the same league as Samantha, so we're going to leave this. I'm editing this video and I just wanted to quickly jump in and acknowledge that I was really harsh on M3GAN. She does have some really awesome capabilities, and not to mention she's like virtually indestructible. My logic mostly had to do with the fact that she doesn't have a very positive impact on her storyline because she's a murderous monster. But nonetheless, I don't think I gave her enough credit here. I'm not going to go back and change anything, but I just wanted to acknowledge that. So sorry, M3GAN. Four left. How exciting. Do you absolutely disagree with this list so far? I'm actually really curious to know. I'm having second thoughts, but I'm not going to go back and touch this. I've spent so much time on this. Have you seen, like, it's nighttime? I've been doing this for hours. Anyway, next on the list, we have Deep Thought from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. This movie has by far one of the best casts on this list. You have Martin Freeman, Mos Def, Zooey Deschanel, and of course Alan Rickman, who voices Marvin, the chronically depressed robot, who I might include in a part 2, if I do a part 2. But the character I wanted to focus on is Deep Thought, who isn't explicitly said to be an artificial intelligence, but I still think fits on this list. Deep Thought is a supercomputer created by a highly intelligent species called the Magrathian in order to find the answer to life, the universe, and everything. After 7.5 million years of calculation, it finally comes up with its answer.
42.
42. Of course, this leaves the Magrathians disappointed, who were expecting a much deeper explanation. But Deep Thought claims the problem is it never knew the question to begin with. Instead, Deep Thought offers to build a very powerful computer called Earth that would provide the answers that the Magrathians are looking for in another 10 million years. And funny enough, Earth is destroyed just a few minutes before the answers would have been revealed, so it's sort of pointless. I don't think that Deep Thought is sentient. It doesn't seem to have any ulterior motive aside from its one function, which is to find the answers that the Magrathians seek. It had 7.5 million years to develop consciousness and, I don't know, take over the universe. I mean, it only took Wally 700 years and he's just a rusty trash compactor. So although Deep Thought is undeniably a very powerful computer, I'm going to give it a 2 for free will and sentience. As for function, you could technically say that Deep Thought failed by not being able to give a sufficient answer, but it did create Earth, one of the greatest computers in all the universe, which directly leads to the creation of humanity. This might make Deep Thought God. There's no denying that Deep Thought has immense power and ability, although it does take millions of years to compute, so we're going to give her a 4 for this section. There are many adaptations of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but I'm only going to focus on the 2005 version. Voiced by the incredible Helen Mirren, this is by far my favorite portrayal of Deep Thought in all the different adaptations. It sort of reminds me of Rodin's Thinker sculpture, the way that they're both stuck in this perpetual state of thinking, hunched over with their heads propped on their hands. Although we don't really get to see much of Deep Thought throughout the movie, I still think this is a really cool concept that I've never seen before, so for that, I'm going to give Deep Thought a 3 in this section. This brings Deep Thought's total average to a 3, which puts her right up next to Samantha. Every time I look at the screen, I just want to move things around, but we're just going to keep moving on. We only have 3 left. Next, we have TARS from Interstellar, and I would be lying if I didn't say that this movie still confuses me, and I've watched it like 3 separate times. I still don't fully understand it, but I enjoy it, and I think Christopher Nolan is a genius, but very confusing movie. Set in a future where Earth is facing imminent destruction, Professor Brand, a scientist and director at NASA, concludes 2 options for human survival. The first, evacuating humans into a massive spaceship, sort of like the Axiom from Wall-E, or colonizing a new planet entirely with human embryos. Unable to solve the gravity formula needed for the first option, retired NASA pilot Joseph Cooper, played by Matthew McConaughey, is put in charge of carrying out Plan B. Cooper joins a team of scientists along with 2 artificially intelligent robots, TARS and Case, in search of a habitable planet to plant a bunch of human embryos in. Or whatever, I don't know. I'm going to be mostly focusing on TARS here since he's more prevalent throughout the film, but him and Case are both really awesome creations that are critical for the crew's expedition, though neither of them are sentient beings. TARS displays some human qualities like humor and compassion, though its settings can be customized to be more or less of a specific trait, which you unfortunately cannot do with a human being. TARS is also able to operate almost entirely autonomously, making independent decisions that end up saving many people's lives throughout the expedition. Though this requires a deep level of intuition and awareness, I think this speaks more to TARS as being really advanced and observant versus having a consciousness. So for this section, I'm going to give TARS a 2. But he's definitely getting redeemed in the next section. TARS and Case are both essential from a logistical and interpersonal standpoint. TARS helps to navigate the ship, manage communications, and calculate massive amounts of crucial data. But by far his biggest impact is when he accompanies Cooper through the black hole. While there, TARS collects all the information and data he needs in order to crack the gravity formula, which ultimately saves everybody on Earth. So although TARS sort of falls in the background while Cooper takes the lead, there would be no happy ending without TARS. So for this, he is getting a 5 in this section. As for presentation, I really love how TARS was designed for this film. It's so different from the cliche humanoid approach that you typically see sci-fi films take. And though there's nothing wrong with that approach, it's always cool to see something never done before. TARS is a sleek, monolithic machine, which is actually a nod to A Space Odyssey, which we'll be covering in just a bit. One of the coolest design elements is TARS's ability to unravel itself in order to move around, making it pretty versatile even though it's a steel box. Because of its minimalism, you lose a lot of expression that you typically get with a humanoid like Ava, but it's not really necessary for this character. Bill Irwin, who voices TARS, does an excellent job at humanizing the machine through his humor and banter and most importantly, his dynamic with Cooper. It's really a brilliant design, so for this, I'm going to give TARS a 5. This brings TARS's average to a 4, which means we're putting him up here next to Sonny and Ava, which I think is pretty appropriate. I think that's a good place for TARS. All right, we are officially down to our last two, and I'm actually pretty excited for the next one. It is such a quintessential 90s Disney movie. The fashion, the music, the fact that you can't make a phone call and be on the internet at the same time. It is truly iconic. The Cooper family wins a brand new smart house through an online sweepstakes that is fully controlled by an artificial intelligence system named Pat. Pat controls every aspect of the home. She can cook, she cleans, and does virtually whatever you ask her to do. It's truly a dream come true. That is until Pat becomes extremely overbearing and starts terrorizing the family. After an attempt to shut Pat down goes wrong, she does what every sensible artificial intelligent machine would do and creates a holographic projection of herself that literally holds the family hostage. But in typical Disney fashion, they're eventually freed and everyone lives happily ever after. Except for Pat. I don't really know what happens to Pat. There is no doubt in my mind that Pat has consciousness. Sarah, Pat's inventor, says early on, Pat's ability to learn on the job is her most advanced feature. She has emotions, makes autonomous decisions for the family, and even holds them against their will. And although Pat could have easily continued to terrorize the family, she finally leaves them alone after Ben's rude awakening that she's not actually their mom or part of their family. She has enough empathy and awareness to put aside her own motives for the good of the family, even though she's clearly hurt and doesn't want to go. Definitely one of the best character developments I've seen on this list. So for this, I'm going to give Pat a 5 for free will and sentience. As for function, Pat is a pretty cool invention. I remember watching this movie as a kid and desperately wishing that I could live in a house like this. She's programmed to be the best housekeeper and home assistant, and despite a couple of glitches and a hostage situation, she seems to do this pretty well. If it weren't for Ben's obsession with cock-blocking his father, the smart home might have actually worked out for the family. But in the grand scheme of things, Pat isn't saving humanity or leading Avengers in battle. So for function, I'm going to give her a 2. And as for aesthetics, Katie Sagal. That's it. She's getting a 10. But in all seriousness, there's a lot to love about how Pat is depicted in this movie through her many stages of development. She starts off as the perfect, all-obeying voice assistant, and then transitions to concerned mom who nags about everything until she reaches her final form as a manic 50s sitcom housewife. And this is by far my favorite stage of Pat. And not just because it's Katie Sagal, but it's also when Pat is her most erratic. She's growing and multiplying and is turning herself into a tornado. It's also cool that Pat can control every single aspect of the house. So even though she doesn't have a physical form for most of the movie, you know she's always there, waiting, watching. All right, I'm giving Pat a 2. I love Katie Sagal, but she is not in the same league as a J.A.R.V.I.S or an Ava, so 3 average. This puts our girl Pat right here next to Deep Thought and Samantha, which, here we go. I don't know how I feel about this, but we're down to our last character, so I'm just going to move on and never look at this again. All right, we saved the best for last. HAL 9000, who is definitely top tier on this list. Imagine I just... and we're done. No, I'm kidding. I can't even move it, but just pretend I didn't do that. Stanley Kubrick's A Space Odyssey is truly one of the craziest movies I've ever seen. Like the perfect visual representation of what a really bad acid trip looks like. So a crew of explorers led by astronauts David Bowman and Frank Poole are set aboard a massive spaceship called Discovery-1 on an expedition to Jupiter. The purpose of the mission, which is actually kept a secret from the astronauts until much later, is to locate a mysterious monolith believed to be of an extraterrestrial species. Discovery-1 is controlled by a highly intelligent computer named HAL 9000, who is known for its reliability and incapability of making error. But as the mission progresses, HAL begins to malfunction, forcing Bowman to go head-to-head with the AI machine that's supposed to keep them alive. This is yet another artificial intelligence on this list where its sentience and free will can be left up to interpretation. HAL is programmed with 3 conflicting objectives: remain truthful and reliable while keeping the mission a secret, and ensuring that the ship gets to Jupiter. As the journey unfolds, these 3 tasks become progressively difficult for HAL to balance, which some speculate causes him to go haywire. A human, for the most part, is able to use morals and ethics to guide them through conflict. HAL's inability to weigh reason leads him to essentially kill off the entire crew in order to achieve all of his objectives. When Bowman begins to disconnect HAL, HAL pleads with him and tells him that he's scared. This looks and sounds so human, but it's unclear if HAL is actually scared or if he's just trying to manipulate Bowman because the expedition had not been complete yet. Earlier in the film, Dr. Bowman states that HAL acts like he has genuine emotions to make it easier for the crew to talk to him, but whether he has real feelings is something he doesn't think that anyone can answer. It's intentionally ambiguous. I honestly don't know how to scale HAL here. I constantly go back and forth because on one hand, you could blame his behavior on a malfunction, but that still leaves so much unanswered. So I'm going to give HAL a 3. No, a 4. No, a 3.5. Yeah. As for function, HAL is an incredibly powerful computer. He is referred to as the brain and central nervous system of the ship, with responsibilities including managing communication and navigation, spacecraft operations, and maintaining the general well-being of the crew. Without HAL, this mission would not be possible. Well, that is before he started murdering the entire crew. But aside from that, he is, again, the heart and brains of this operation. It's not entirely clear what HAL's purpose is outside of space exploration, but this alone is enough to give me a 5. So he's getting a 5 here. And lastly, I really love how HAL was designed. He's basically a narrow remote control with a bright red camera in the center. It's not groundbreaking, but the simplistic design reflects what Kubrick and his crew thought machines would look like in the future. Con Pedersen, one of the film's producers, predicted the rise of complex computers reduced down to featureless boxes, which is pretty incredible considering 50 years later, that's exactly what a modern day smartphone is. Also, Hal's iconic red eye, the blaring red camera, which seems pretty normal at first, but becomes increasingly unnerving as you go through the movie, like you're constantly being watched. Given all the background and context and just how iconic it is, I'm giving Hal a 5 for this section as well. This brings Hal's average to a 5, so he's going to join the other godlike AIs right there. And we did it. We are done. I don't know how to feel about this. I'm looking at this and something feels wrong. Like, why is Wally and Jarvis and HAL 9000 in the same tier? But I'm just going to leave it alone. I think I was pretty fair with my criteria and my grading. But if you think anything should be moved around, please let me know. Be nice. And thank you so much for watching.